Hello and welcome everyone to the second instalment of our Cash Chat series. Today we're going to be having a conversation about money in university. My name's Dane and I'm going to be hosting the discussion today, and I'm delighted to be joined by three fantastic guests. We have Iona Bain, who you'll remember from our first instalment of the Cash Chat series, and you might also recognise her from our IGTV channels as well, where she's been dishing out some top budgeting and savings tips for young people. We're also joined today by Ballantyne from Citizens Advice Scotland, and also Tanya Cuthbert from the Student Awards Agency Scotland. So welcome to you all. Why don't we just go around each of you and you can all introduce yourself a little bit more and tell everyone a little bit about your background and what it is that you do.
Sure, I'm Iona Bain. I'm founder of the Young Money blog. I've been writing and talking about young people's finances for about 10 years now. So I'm really excited to be joining this Cash Chats session on student finances, because I went to university about a decade ago and there were a lot of things that I did well and there were a lot of things I didn't do so well. So I'll be very happy to share the things that I learned during that time with all of you today.
Sure. So I'm Ballantyne, as Dane said, and I work for Citizens Advice Scotland, mainly on policy. So that means basically taking all the information we get from people who are coming in looking for help, and it can be with all kinds of money issues and other things, and then using that to lobby the government for improved services and policies for people. So sometimes that's students, sometimes it's on housing, sometimes it's on work.
Hi, I'm Tanya and I work for the outreach team of Student Awards. So we are the funding awareness team. We go out to universities normally, schools. We talk to pupils about how to apply. We go to open days. That's obviously being curtailed just now because we're not allowed. So we're doing more and more stuff like this. We've got virtual open days coming up with Dundee Uni and Aberdeen Uni. So this is our new way of making students aware about funding.
Well, thank you all again for joining us for the conversation today. Now, before we dive into the questions that young people have submitted for this, it might be a good idea to just have a little talk about funding for people who haven't applied for it yet for university. People will be going back very soon. So Tanya, I'm going to come to you for this first question and just ask, for those that are heading to university or college this year who haven't quite sorted out their funding yet, what is it that they need to do?
Most importantly is to apply. So if they've maybe taken a late place through college or they've taken a late place through clearing, they need to get their application in now. In terms of tuition fees, their fees don't get paid until January, so that's nothing to worry about. But in terms of student loans or any bursaries they may be entitled to, they need to get their application in now. We can't guarantee loans or bursaries will be in place at the start of their course, given how late in the year we are. Any money due to them will be backdated, but in terms of tuition fees, we don't pay them in January, so nothing to worry about.
Okay, so get your finger out if you've not done it yet.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Now, we've been gathering questions submitted by young people over the past couple of weeks, specifically for this conversation. Our first one is still on the subject of financial support for students. What additional support is available to students apart from SAAS and bursary?
So it'll depend a lot on where you are in the country in your own particular circumstances. If you're at college, for example, and you're studying something up to what's called advanced higher level, and your parents or guardians aren't loaded, you could be eligible for EMA, Educational Maintenance Allowance, and that's a regular payment which you'll get between the ages of 16 and 19. If you're disabled or a carer for someone that is, or you've got a child of your own, whether disabled or not, you could be eligible for support there. And then if you find yourself in trouble with money during term time itself, once you've started university or college, most institutions will offer hardship funds or discretionary funds. And that's basically if you suddenly found yourself without for whatever reason, or there's been a big expense you didn't expect, then they might be able to help you out. And if you're really stuck, there's also a thing called a crisis grant from your local council, and that's more of a one-off payment for if something's gone quite badly wrong. But check out the differences for your own circumstances. It's hard to say across the board, but check what your university or college offers and have a look at things like benefit checkers online to see if there's anything else you might be eligible for.
In terms of SAAS, we deal with care experienced students, so that's quite a specific fund for anybody who's been in care, kinship care, foster care, disabled students allowance as well, and that will come through ourselves. You'll initially do that through your university or college. University and college discretionary funds, as was mentioned, that's really, really important, especially nowadays if you're struggling throughout the year or at any point throughout the year and you've taken out your maximum funding from SAAS, please don't be afraid to contact the university or college directly about the discretionary funds. Really, really important.
And I would just echo what Nina said about checking out what is on offer through your university, because when I was at uni, we had a drop in our household income at the time, and I went to my college and I asked if there were any hardship funds available. I found out there was one, and I applied for it, not expecting to be eligible or to get the money, but I did, and it was really helpful to me that year. So my advice would be, find out what's available and don't be afraid to get what you're entitled to.
So it pays to ask the question. If you're not sure, find someone who might know and try and get that information, because you never know what might be available to you.
Definitely.
What resources would you all recommend for a young student who's about to head off to college or university in terms of financial management for them to look at before they go off and start their course?
The top two resources that I would recommend are Money Advice Service, which is completely independent and trustworthy, and also the National Union of Students. Both their websites are a treasure trove of information for students starting this year who aren't sure about concepts like borrowing and budgeting. Those are the top two resources I'd recommend. But I'd also recommend checking out Money Saving Expert. It's a site that is very well established. It's got a very transparent business model, so you can trust the information that you're getting on there too. It's helpful if you want to find out what kind of products you should be using as a student, or if you're looking for money saving hacks. And also there's Save the Student, which is quite a good website with pretty solid, strong information on there too. And there'll be lots of student finance guides coming out in the media over the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for those as well.
I would recommend the Stuart Ivory Financial Education Trust website, or SIFIT, specifically for students in Scotland. That has a fantastic array of all different apps you can use, banking advice, really in-depth stuff. And they're a group that go out to schools and speak to S5 and S6 pupils about borrowing. Obviously that's not happening just now, but that website is fantastic. And the government also has a student information portal, which is accessed through the SAAS website. And there's a budget calculator on that, which is really useful.
Well, I think it would be remiss of me not to plug our own website at this point. So it's got a lot of information about money. There's like a debt and money section, which has a really good, thorough budgeting tool that will let you put in everything that's coming in, everything that's going out, and giving you an idea of what you can or can't spend. And then on top of that, it might not be the thing that you're thinking of immediately at the moment, but moving out for the first time for a lot of people when they're going to college, university, means that you'll be living on your own or with other people for the first time, and making sure you know your rights when it comes to housing, and you know your rights if you're starting work, if you're starting a part-time job, is crucial to make sure you don't get ripped off, and that you're keeping as much of the money as you should be, getting as much, and only spending what you need to. So I think make sure you really know your rights when it comes to housing. Make sure you get your council tax exemption. You shouldn't be paying council tax as a student. And make sure basic boring things like your energy and your internet provider is the cheapest option as well. Shop around using all the sites that were mentioned by the other two.
And moving on from that, we touched on this topic a little bit in our first Cash Chat series. Iona gave some great recommendations, but I think it's maybe a good one to go over again, just in case there's some other ones that you guys want to recommend, or maybe some student-based things that are out there. So are there any apps or software that you would recommend for students to help with saving money?
In my opinion, there are two kinds of financial app that students need to think about. The first one is a budgeting app, and the second is a chatbot. Now, which one should you go for? Well, it really depends on your personality and preferences. It's not a case of one size fits all. When it comes to budgeting apps, in my experience, these tend to suit people who are very visual, who like graphs and charts, who like numbers, and who are pretty in control of their spending, but just want to feel a bit more on top of things. So there are some really good budgeting apps out there like Money Dashboard, Emma, and YOLT. Again, it's up to you to go out and research which one of those would be best for you. They've all got their pros and cons, but broadly speaking, those are the three best budgeting apps to look into, and they'll really help you visualize your finances and see where your money is going, which is really important when you're a student and you're trying to make that loan last. And the second kind of financial app you need to perhaps consider is a chatbot. Now, this works more for people who like the personal touch when it comes to their finances. So with these chatbots like Cleo and Chip, they hook up to your finances, and you basically set up this relationship with them where they send you messages, keeping updated on how much money is in your account, how much you're spending, give you helpful suggestions as to what you could do with your money. And one of those chatbots, Cleo, even has a roast function where you can get them to send you like really snarky messages with memes if you're spending too much money. And some people love that because they just want a bit of tough love and they need someone to remind them, a bit like their mum, that they're maybe spending a little bit too much money. So it really depends on what kind of person you are as to what approach you'll prefer. But within those two kinds of financial apps, you'll probably find something that will work for you.
No, I think I need one of those as well to help me. In terms of what's just been said, there's so many of them, absolutely so many of them, and you can narrow them down to your specific circumstances. In terms of SAAS, we pay our students monthly, so they're restricted as to how much they get every month. So they normally get paid over about 10 months. Most courses, they get paid over about 10 months. Hopefully that will help them budget, plus their part-time job. And during the summer, they can work a little bit more, and that will hopefully set them up again for the following year.
Thanks for all your recommendations. You've got lots to choose from there. And I think the main thing is that there is help and support out there in that format, in an app, online, that you do have things that can help you out. So have a look around and do some research and see what might be right for you. For a lot of students, heading off to university will be a big change in their lives, whether that's moving to a completely new space or spending a lot of time in a new area that away from home, or having to travel a lot to get to somewhere new every single day. So our next couple of questions kind of address that aspect of student life, the big change that comes in terms of being in a new place, whether that's permanently or having to travel there. So first up, what would your tips be in terms of saving money whilst living in a big city?
So for this one, it's fair to say that CAS doesn't have kind of official advice for living in a big city as a student, but as someone who is at university just after the last recession, I feel like there's probably a few tips there that might be worth sharing. The first one is, if possible, try to use active travel as much. So that's walking, cycling, or using your wheelchair, because even public transport will add up if you're getting 2-3 buses a day, running around in cars, and parking charges in a city centre make it pretty unrealistic for most people. The second key thing would be, don't assume that your nearest supermarket is the cheapest, and particularly when it comes to certain items, don't assume that the chain supermarket will be the cheapest either. Make sure you check out all your independent grocers nearby, and if you didn't grow up shopping in Asian or African or Eastern European supermarkets, now's the time to expand your horizons and support some local businesses who'll give you much better value on certain ingredients. I think probably the last thing is to try and buy as much as possible secondhand. Whether it's clothes, furniture, textbooks, things for your flats. It's better for the environment, firstly, it's cheaper, and you'll be able to find much better quality secondhand than you'd ever be able to afford new. And if you're still not sure about working around charity shops, or you've got a bit squiffy about the idea of secondhand, you can call it antique or vintage, or look at marketplaces online as well.
I would also add that you're going to save so much more money in the long run if you cook your meals at home. We all like to go out for a meal for a special occasion. We like to get a treat as a takeaway once in a while. But if you can try and keep those as occasional luxuries, then they won't just lose their novelty. They'll mean so much more when you actually do those things. Whereas during term time, if you're cooking at home, preferably with your housemates so that it becomes more cost effective and you can organize it better. And it's also nice as well. It's a nice way to bond with your housemates and get to know them and your friends at uni too. And just master 6 or 7 basic meals using ingredients that you can find in those local grocers and stores that Nina mentioned there. And if you do that, then you'll not only save money, but you'll also feel better because you'll be eating healthier food that you've cooked yourself. You know what's gone into it. And that way you're also going to be saving money, hopefully not buying lunches. And if you can invest in a flask, a nice one, you don't have to get a geeky thermal flask these days, but if you can get a nice flask and just make your own coffee at home, that's a huge money saver as well, rather than going into Starbucks or Pret to get that cheeky latte every day, because that really adds up too.
Amazing advice from both of you. And what I would say from our side of things, something that can help you with all that advice is having a Young Scot card. If you don't have one, I would recommend that you look into it and go out and get one. Because if you do, there's loads of great discounts that you can get on lots of different things. A lot of the things that you were mentioning there: food, clothes, days out, supplies for your course, loads of stuff. So if you head to young.scot/card, you can get all the information you need about applying for one. And if you head to young.scot/discounts, you'll be able to find out lots of different things that you can get your money off. having that little bit of room, getting that little discount here or there on different things can go a long way as a student. Just being able to treat yourself, it's a tough life as a student, and you do deserve to treat yourself every now and then. So if you can be able to get a little discount on some new clothes or a nice meal, something like that, then that can go a long way. So I would recommend looking into the Young Scot card as well. But also the advice that Nina and Iona gave out there, I think is really, really good stuff. Now we're going to move on to speaking a little bit about budgeting now. So I think this is something that everyone can feed into. What budgeting advice would you have for students that are trying to stretch their money?
Speak to your parents or speak to who you live with, because that's the conversation that a lot of students don't want to have, or they just assume the money's just going to appear out of nowhere. It doesn't work like that. So have the chat with your parents, especially if you're staying away from home. Who's going to pay your halls? Do you pay it out of your student loan or your bursary, or will mum and dad pay it? So have that conversation. It's really, really important. You may also find that your parents are willing to give you an extra amount of money every month. So yes, for me, that's hugely important. Have the conversation, the dreaded conversation, but it has to be had.
I spoke on the last video that I did for Young Scot on Instagram about the importance of the magic number. So if you don't know what that is, it's really the amount of money that you have left over to spend once you've deducted all your essential expenses. And the way that you figure that out is to understand what your loan is and when it comes in, plus add on any income that you get from jobs or bursaries and grants, and then subtract from that all your essential expenses like your accommodation costs, your mobile phone contract, and any essential expenses for your course like stationery and textbooks. And the money left over, you then divide that either by 4 for a weekly amount or by 31 for a daily amount. And then you've got to round it up. And it's not an exact number, and it won't be the same every day or every month, but it will give you an anchor in your head. And you can then think about that number as you're going about your day-to-day life and spending money, and it'll just maybe provide that little check on your spending so that you are not going too far into your overdraft. Because I think it's really important to remember that your overdraft is there as a stopgap, and it can be really helpful, but you are going to have to pay it off once you graduate. And yes, you're given a few years to do that, but it will have to be paid off one day, and it's going to be so much easier for you if you don't go too far into that overdraft as a student, rather than having this massive mountain to climb when you're a graduate. So think about the magic number. That's my advice.
Just a couple of kind of, I guess, more words of warning, things to look out for when you're budgeting. If you find that the magic number is 0 or a negative number, that's when you're probably entitled to more than you realise. And so try to stay away from things like payday loans. I had a couple of pals who had to use that at university, or thought they had to use that, and yeah, it hung over them for ages. So keep an eye out for anything that sounds too good to be true. And if you know month in, month out that you're coming up short on something and you've cut back, you think wherever you can, you're not spending anything outrageous, go to your university straight away. You shouldn't have to be struggling to, eating beans for a full week. You really shouldn't. So chat to the university or your college and see if there's any extra support out there. And a slightly kind of left field suggestion is see what volunteering opportunities are around, because there's all kinds of things where you might think, oh, I need to spend money on this, or I've got a particular hobby that I need to spend money on. But there's actually, you can look at things where something you're passionate about, if it's a university club, a student union, or a charity, and you'll find not only that the time you spend volunteering is time you're not spending any money, which is really good, but you also find that you'll get a whole bunch of kind of perks, some description. You might freebies to say thank you, invites to cool events, and you'll learn lots and meet different kinds of people who all have their own tips for managing their money and keeping costs down as well.
I would totally agree with what Nina said there, and I would add to that a big debt danger for students now is buy now, pay later. So this is where you use a service like Klarna at the checkout when you're buying clothes from places like ASOS, and this essentially allows you to buy stuff that you might not end up paying for if you're just looking to try on clothes at home. It sounds really tempting, it sounds like a really good idea, but it's very easy to lose control of that process, and if you do, you will harm your credit rating, and that's going to make it a lot harder to borrow for stuff in the future. So if you do have to borrow money, students get interest-free overdrafts. That is usually the best way to borrow, and it's through your bank, and it is a much more mainstream way of borrowing than through payday loans or buy now, pay later. But if you are struggling, speak to Citizens Advice Scotland. don't be afraid to get the help that you need, rather than get into more debt, because that's just going to add to your problems.
In terms of student loans themselves, the fear that some people have about student loans, and some parents have the fear, more so than the students. Remember, your loan is there for you to help you to live, to work, to eat, to do anything, to study. A lot of students don't take out their loan initially, but remember, with SAAS, you can take out your student loan at any point throughout the year. So if you feel after Christmas you're struggling and you haven't taken out your loan, you can take out your loan then. So please don't be afraid of student loans. Do your own research. It's really, really important. They don't affect your credit rating. So the only time you could lose control with or it would affect your credit rating with your student loan is if you leave the country once you've graduated or left college and you don't tell the loan company. So do research, especially with parents as well. Make sure they can go on to, Martin Lewis, the Money Saving Expert website. That's really, really good. That explains how student loans work. So that would be my advice. Don't be afraid of student loans.
Something that Nina touched on a little bit a couple of questions ago was saving money on travelling. And we were speaking about that aspect of student life, if that is something that you have to all of a sudden do, having to travel a lot. So how can students save money when they're travelling to university or college every day?
Yeah, everything that Nina mentioned before is really important. But additionally, there is also the 16 to 25 rail card. If you haven't already got one, it's a fantastic way to get discounts on your train travel for the next few years. So you can get one lasting a year, that will cost you £30. Or you can get one lasting 3 years that will cost you £70. If you can afford to get the one lasting 3 years, then you're going to save £20. And it may sound like a lot of money, £70, but you are going to make that saving back and more over time, because you get a third off most rail fares throughout the UK. If you have a 16 to 25 rail card. So it's a real no-brainer if you're having to travel by train for uni. And I'd also add that if you are booking train tickets, try to book in advance. Even if it's just a few days before you travel, or even the night before you travel, it's going to be cheaper than if you just rock up to the station and buy a ticket on the day.
Just to mention that if you've got the option of picking from different timetables for your classes, if you've got the same module and they're running it on 2 different days, check to see if you can condense the time you actually need to be on campus, because that could save you a full day's worth of travel sometimes. And obviously not if it means you have to change a different course that you don't want to do, but it's just worth checking if you've got options sometimes for bigger courses that might be out there. And if you're travelling by bus, which is really common, particularly across the west of Scotland, then looking for your week pass or your month pass as opposed to just paying single fares will save you a heap of money as well.
What I would add, in terms of public transport in Scotland, another great way for you to save money, if you've got a Young Scot card and you're age 16, 17 or 18 years old, you can use that for discount, and that works on bus, train and ferry travel all across Scotland. So have a look into that and make sure that you're stretching your money as far as you can when it comes to that kind of travel. Head to young.scot/card to find out all the information that you need about applying for a card. And if you've already got one, you can get the information there about what kind of money you can save and where you can save that on public transport. We're going to move on to part-time jobs. I think it's something that Tanya mentioned earlier. Is it something that you would recommend for a student if they are at college or university to have a part-time job supporting their studies?
If a student is doing a HNC or a HND, they're normally in around 2 to 3 days a week. So there's plenty of opportunity to work part-time or to continue to work part-time. Some of the universities, depending on where you're going, check with them, and depending on your course of how many hours they're okay with you working. Some of the more vocational courses like teaching, nursing, it's a bit more difficult to work part-time. So you may have to manage your money better. But generally, most students or most universities, they're happy enough with you working 16, 17 hours a week, maybe a couple of shifts. So certainly it's a huge thing for you as well, to go in your CV if you get work in the bar. A lot of the big chains like TK Maxx, Primark or Primark, depending on where you're from, Tesco, they will allow you to move your job. So for example, if you work at TK Maxx in Edinburgh and you're going to Dundee to study, a lot of these places will let you move to where you're going to study. So make sure you check that out as well. That's hugely important.
I think Tanya's point about taking account of your own circumstances is really important. Like we said at the start, thinking about what support you do from your family financially or not, and then what that means in terms of how much you'll need to earn, and then balancing that with the needs of your course as well, because that will be different. Classically, medical degrees are always going to be much more intense than maybe other ones. And so it's worth checking out the circumstances overall. And then if you are going into work for the very first time. As a young person, if you are going to university straight from school or college straight from school, then it's worth being aware that people will assume if you don't like what's happening at work, you'll challenge it. And so occasionally bad bosses might be on the lookout for naive students who don't know their rights. They're not going to claim their full breaks. They're not going to claim their full holiday pay. So using our website or any of the other kind of employment rights advice sources, it's really crucial to actually get your contract, know what it says. There's certain minimum rights you get no matter what your contract says, and making sure you're well versed in them. And so if anything is a bit dodgy, if your pay slip is lower than it should be, if you're not getting any holiday pay, which you should get even on a 0 hours contract, by the way, then it's important to be able to challenge that and make sure you're actually getting the full due that you're worth and that you've earned.
Yeah, I was an usher at a local concert hall whilst I was at uni as a part-time job. So I got to see concerts for free as well as earn some money. So it was a real win-win situation. I would also add that if you are perhaps trying to shield or limit your contact with others during this uncertain period, then you might want to explore options for working from home and earning a bit of money as a side hustle, say through eBay or Depop or TaskRabbit. If you've got skills like coding and web design, you could sell those online and make a little bit of money. And that could be a really good option if you are wanting to limit your contact with others. But all I would say is that if you do go down that road, you need to declare all your earnings to HMRC, the tax office. Otherwise, you could be presented with a nasty tax bill. So you'll need to fill out a self-assessment tax return. But I've been earning money doing bits and pieces online for the past 10 years. And I think it's a really good option for those who want to do more work based at home.
Now, next question, we're going to move back on to funding. So I'm going to come to you on this one, Tanya. This year has been unique for everyone, but not only because of coronavirus, but also because back in January, the UK left the EU, which is a massive change for everyone. So has that affected SAAS at all and the kind of funding that Scottish students will rely on?
The simple answer to that is no. Scottish students won't be affected at all by Brexit. Their funding in the UK is devolved, so each country in the UK looks after, their own education system. So luckily up in Scotland, we've had free tuition up here for a very, very long time. So we're very, very fortunate. That will continue. And that's obviously based on whichever government is in power. But no, Brexit will not affect our Scottish students. It will affect EU students coming here to study. But again, that's not going to have any impact on our home students. So our home students will continue to get funding the way they're getting it just now.
I think it's a really big point that we can almost forget about just now with everything that's going on. It always seems like January was such a long time ago, but it's something to keep in mind, and thanks for clarifying that information. Now I'm going to come to you for this next one, Nina. Still on the topic of funding, but for people who receive universal credit or other benefits, what impact might going to university or college have on that?
As a general rule, like I said earlier, if you're getting a particular benefit because you're disabled or a carer, that should continue. If you've got universal credit, normally that would stop if you started full-time education, but there are a few exceptions to that. So if you're old enough to get pension credit, but you live with a partner who's below pension credit age, if you get, as we said before, attendance allowance, disability allowance, person dependence payment, and you've got what's called limited capability for work, that means you might be able to get some money from universal credit. And if you look after a child who's under 16 or under 20, if they're also in full-time education, and if you're returning to a course because you took time off because of illness or caring, there's a few other exceptions. And one of the key ones is if you don't have parental support. That's quite specific. And it means that either your parents have died or you can't live with them for some specific reason. For the latter, that would be, example, your relationship is broken down to such an extent that living with them isn't possible or might even put your health at risk. So if you're in that situation, then make sure you get your universal credit. It's really important. But for most people, I think particularly younger people starting university, they're less likely to have kind of caring responsibilities for their own child, although they might be helping out family members. But check out, again, our own website has this all really clearly laid out, so you can double check. And the key thing is just, if you are on universal credit, you can keep your journal updated and it will change automatically based on the information that you put in there. So I'd say that's the key thing. It's different, again, for each circumstance, but there's lots of information out there where you can check your specific set of circumstances and make sure you're getting what you're owed. You can also make an appointment, phone up and talk to somebody over the phone. The Citizens Advice Bureau all around the country, they've got their opening hours and their telephone numbers all online. So you can check them out and you're just looking at it. You can't figure out what to do. Somebody will happily talk you through it and let you know what the situation is.
And for people to find their local bureau and contact information, is that on the cas.org.uk site?
That is cas.org.uk, so cas.org.uk, and you can find your nearest bureau. When they start opening up and giving face-to-face advice, that will hopefully happen, not too far away, but in the meantime, over email, over phone, you'll have somebody who knows their stuff, is totally free, totally impartial and confidential, and they'll be able to help you out if you're struggling.
Fantastic. I think that's a good place now for us to wrap up the conversation. So I just want to thank each of you again for joining me today and filming this. And I think the advice and the information that you've given for young people will be really, really beneficial for everyone that's heading off for the first time to university or college next month, or they're heading back and they needed a little refresher. Some really, really great information and tips on managing your money. So thank you all for joining me.
Thank you, Dane. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dane. Been a blast.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for everyone for tuning in. You can find out lots of great information on our 3 expert guests today. Each have some great information on the websites. So first up, you can head to the SAAS website at saas.gov.uk for all the information you need about student loans and funding. For Citizens Advice Scotland, their site has lots of useful information on all things financial, and you can find contact information for your local bureaus if you do need to speak to someone. For that funding advice, that financial advice, you can head to citizensadvice.org.uk/Scotland. Or Iona Bain here, a resident financial expert for young people. She runs a fantastic blog called the Young Money blog, which has information tailored specifically for young people. You can find that at youngmoneyblog.co.uk. And I've plugged Young Scot a few times throughout the conversation today. We also have some good information on money, managing your money through our Money and Me campaign. So you can check that out at young.scot/money-and-me. So there's lots of information out there to choose from. You've got the Citizens Advice site, you've got SAAS, you've got Iona Bain's blog, and you've got the Young Scot site. And there's lots and lots of other information and support out there available to you. The main thing to remember is do your research, know what you're entitled to, know what support is on offer before you head off to college and university, so that you can get that benefit. So thank you all again for tuning in. I hope that you have found this useful, and thank you for joining us. It's goodbye from all of us.